The little boy wasn't crying, he was trembling, stranded in the middle of Central Park while hundreds of people streamed past without a glance. Then a woman knelt beside him. One broken word slipped from his lips, French, and the moment she answered him in the same language, everything shifted. Across the park, a man stopped mid-stride. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost, then lowered his head and murmured into his cuff, "Find everything about her, now." Before the woman could even rise to her feet, his men were already moving, closing in fast, surrounding her with silent precision. She felt a heavy, assessing gaze on her back, making her skin prickle with sudden, irrational fear, like she had just been catalogued by a predator. Merilyn forced herself to walk, not run, away from Central Park. The feeling persisted. A cold weight settled just between her shoulder blades, but she rationalized it away. The man, the imposing figure who had issued that chilling, low command was probably the head of some private security firm, and the man who retrieved Luke, Marco, was the chauffeur. In the chaotic world of the ultra-rich, she'd simply witnessed a high-stakes moment of professional failure. She dismissed the terrifying man, Aeron Mack, as nothing more than a powerful stranger whose face she would never see again. Merilyn's world was one of quiet dignity, where wealth was measured in historical value, not cold cash. She returned to the hushed, climate-controlled silence of the Metropolitan Museum, where she worked as an archivist of European texts. Her expertise lay in the 17th century French manuscripts, a world of ink, vellum, and long-dead poets. Her quiet, focused life was her armor. She valued meticulous research and the predictable rhythm of her work. The brief, intense encounter with Luke and the subsequent tension faded into the background, another odd anecdote from her day. But the city, it seemed, was not ready to release her. If you're enjoying the story, click subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps us to bring more interesting stories like this, and you don't want to miss it. The first glitch appeared subtle enough to be coincidence. She desperately needed a rare 1,850 French nautical dictionary for a colleague, a book notoriously stuck in deep storage. Before she even finished submitting the request form, a message pinged her computer. The volume was already on her desk, ready for review. When she asked the junior archivist about it, the young man just shrugged, saying a very well-dressed delivery service had dropped it off an hour ago. The second glitch happened that evening, back in her modest Queens apartment. She mentioned to her downstairs neighbor that she was craving a specific, hard-to-find bottle of Muscadet, a cheap French wine she loved. The very next day, her local, small-time liquor store had a whole new shelf dedicated to it, complete with a handwritten sign, Merilyn's Choice. The sudden availability was unnerving. The glitches culminated in an unsettling routine, the feeling of being watched on her commute. Merilyn started seeing the same black, unmarked SUV parked conspicuously near the entrance to her street, too big, too dark, and too pristine for the neighborhood. She told herself it was likely a tourist or a mistake, but the car remained. That night, the surveillance became undeniable. She was scrolling through a mundane news feed when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. No caller ID, just a text message, silent and cold. Merci pour Luc. The protection is in place. The message was signed, simply, A.M. Merilyn stared at the screen, the cool glow reflecting the panic in her wide eyes. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin feeling icy. A.M. Aeron Mack. He had her name. He knew where she lived. He had her private number. And he was claiming to have put protection in place, a chilling confirmation that the black SUV, the early deliveries, and the specialized wine were all due to his terrifying efficiency. He wasn't thanking her. He was marking her. A.M. How did he get my number? And what does he mean? Protection? Merilyn didn't sleep. The single text message, A.M., had dissolved the boundary between her quiet, predictable world and the terrifying presence in the park. She spent the entire night hunched over her laptop, tracing the name. Aeron Mack wasn't just a name. It was a shadow in the high-rises, the silent, efficient head of Mack Global Investments. The articles were vague but chilling, mentioning unorthodox acquisition strategies, untraceable assets, and links to international networks. Mafia Boss wasn't a title on his business card, but the subtext was crystal clear. The final insult arrived just as she clocked in at the Met. Tucked beneath a stack of administrative requests was a heavy, linen envelope. Inside was a single, engraved card, not a threat, but a summons. It listed an address for a midtown penthouse and a specific time for her to be available for pickup. The language was polite, the implication absolute. She was being ordered, not invited. By the time the sleek, black sedan pulled up outside her apartment that evening, Merilyn had replaced fear with a cold resolve. She wouldn't let him claim her life because of an accent. The drive was silent and swift, ending at the pinnacle of a skyscraper. Aeron Mack's office was breathtaking. A minimalist panorama of glass, steel, and untouchable wealth. But it felt more like a vault than an office, luxurious, yes, but sterile and utterly lacking warmth. The only personal item was a small antique French globe resting on a black lacquer table. Then Aeron appeared. He was even more imposing than she remembered. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, which only accentuated the intimidating musculature beneath. His olive skin, the sharp angles of his face, and the dark hair swept back, gave him an aristocratic air that warred violently with the visible, dark tattoos that crept up his neck. He didn't offer a handshake or a smile. His dark, unnerving eyes were fixed on her with the unyielding intensity of a mathematician studying an equation. "Merilyn Dubois," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly sound that resonated with authority. "You are an archivist of European texts at the Met. You specialize in 17th century manuscripts. You were born in Queens. You hold a master's degree from Columbia. And you are fluent in 5 dialects of French, with a particular, rare proficiency in Parisian classicism." He hadn't asked how her day was. He had just read her life back to her, bypassing all small talk. "I am here about Luc," he continued, the name softening his voice by the slightest degree. "His mother was French, Parisian, like you. She was the only person who ever spoke French to him. When she passed, I forbade it. The language hurt too much." His gaze locked onto Merilyn's, the raw pain in his eyes, a sudden, shocking crack in his icy facade. "Your voice, Merilyn," he finished, leaning forward, "is the first thing that has given him peace in years. You are not a coincidence. You are a necessity." He then slid a single, thick black folder across the vast desk. It contained documents confirming her identity, an immediate termination agreement for the Met, and a contract. "I want you to leave the museum immediately. Luc needs you, and I need your expertise. Your job now is to bring that peace back to him full-time." Merilyn took a deep breath, clutching the file. The velvet cage was opening, and she saw the trap clearly. "Mr. Mack, I appreciate your gratitude, but my professional commitments are to the Metropolitan Museum, not private tutoring." Aeron's intense gaze hardened. The brief flash of vulnerability extinguished entirely. The coldness returned, absolute and terrifying. "Your refusal," he said, the words barely a whisper, yet loud enough to shake the sterile room, "is unwise." "I don't take no for an answer, Merilyn." "Your refusal," Aeron said, his voice barely a whisper, yet loud enough to shake the sterile room, "is unwise. I don't take no for an answer, Merilyn." Merilyn stood her ground, even as the sheer, cold force of his will pressed down on her. "I am not an employee you can simply acquire, Mr. Mack. I have a professional life, ethical commitments, and debts that—" Aeron cut her off with a dismissive wave, glancing at the thick black folder Merilyn still clutched. "Your debts are accounted for in the contract. Your salary as Luc's French tutor is $250,000 per annum." He paused, letting the figure hang in the silent room. "But you are correct. You are too valuable to simply be a tutor." He reached behind him and lifted an object from a low credenza. It was a manuscript, bound in heavily worked, distressed red leather, far too old and rare to be handled without white gloves. He placed it directly on the black lacquer of the desk, its fragility exposed. "This is a Traité de la Navigation from 1695, Aeron stated. "A first edition, annotated by the cartographer himself. My private collection, Merilyn, is substantial, focused entirely on French intellectual history, and it is completely uncatalogued. I need a curator and translator of rare French documents." The true offer, the non-negotiable contract twist, hit her with the force of a physical blow. The salary he named next made the first one look like spare change enough to pay off her student loans, settle her mother's mortgage, and secure her future 10 times over. It was a life-changing, obscene sum, designed to dissolve her resistance completely. But Merilyn was an archivist. She knew what belonged in a museum and what belonged on a black market ledger. She leaned over the desk, her gaze fixed not on the sum, but on the manuscript's spine. She recognized the paper, the specific colonial ink. "This piece," she said, her voice dangerously low, "was reported stolen from the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris last year. It should be in a climate-controlled vault, not on your desk." Aeron's expression didn't change. He had finally dropped the polite pretense. "You see my true need, then? I need your specialized knowledge to catalog my acquisitions, to make sure I'm not purchasing fakes. It is highly sensitive work. It is also an effective termination of your legitimate museum career. Your skills, Merilyn, are now wholly contained within Mack Global Investments." The full realization of the velvet cage crashed over her. She was being forcibly co-opted into his illicit business empire. "The surveillance," she challenged, ignoring the contract's astronomical figures. "The SUV outside my house. Does this protection extend to my personal freedom?" Aeron's eyes dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You are no longer just Merilyn Dubois, museum archivist. You are the woman who spoke the language of my dead mother to my son. That makes you priceless. That makes you protected. That makes you mine to employ. The surveillance is protection from the world, and from yourself, should you try to leave." The turning point was agonizing. She looked at the contract, the leverage for her family's life, and thought of Luc, whose small face had found peace in her French. She couldn't fight this kind of power. Merilyn pushed the contract folder back toward him. "I will work for you, Mr. Mack. I will be your curator. But understand this, I will not be your mother's ghost." Aeron simply smiled, the coldness returning to his eyes. "We shall see, Merilyn. Welcome aboard." As Merilyn was escorted toward the door by a silent, suited man, she paused, pretending to stumble near the desk. Her hand went into her pocket, and with practiced, silent efficiency, she positioned her phone and snapped 2 high-quality, high-resolution photographs of the stolen 1695 French manuscript. The image was proof, leverage, and a lethal threat, all rolled into one. She now had the evidence to sink him, but only if she could survive long enough to use it. The next morning, Merilyn was picked up by the same black sedan, but this time, the destination wasn't a sterile penthouse, it was a sprawling, limestone-clad townhouse on the Upper East Side. This was the headquarters of Mack Global Investments, where the legitimate facade met the illicit reality. The moment she stepped inside, Merilyn understood the term velvet cage. The opulence was overwhelming. Marble floors, original 19th century French tapestries, and hushed, cavernous rooms. But it wasn't a home, it was a fortress. She was immediately introduced to the staff, including a stern, silver-haired housekeeper who oversaw the house with military precision, and, more significantly, the ever-present security detail. Every shadowed hallway and every corner held a silent, watchful man. Her life was now under constant, 24-hour surveillance, paid for and demanded by Aeron Mack. Her new workspace was a revelation. A private, state-of-the-art archives office built specifically for her in the mansion's lower level. It was humidity-controlled, fireproof, and equipped with every tool an archivist could dream of. This gift was a double-edged sword. It affirmed her priceless value, but also ensured her work and her physical location were utterly contained. Her first task was to meet Luc, Merilyn found him in a sunlit playroom, looking far less terrified than he had in the park, but equally subdued. She knelt down, greeting him gently in French. The boy immediately lit up. Luc quickly established a deep rapport with her, drawn to the language that tasted of memory and comfort. They spent the first few hours with Merilyn reading him classic French children's stories. During a brief break, Luc confessed quietly, "Papa says I can only speak French with you now, only during lessons. He says it's important to be an American boy." The revelation confirmed Merilyn's worst suspicion. The language was a deeply sensitive, almost taboo subject in the Mack house. Aeron wasn't simply preserving Luc's heritage. He was tightly controlling the emotional trigger that French represented. Merilyn's official, required presence was the only exception he allowed to his own painful, rigid rule. Over the next few days, Merilyn delved into the archives. Aeron's private collection was staggering. A vast array of French artifacts, paintings, sculpture, jewelry, and, most importantly to her, crates upon crates of rare documents. As she began cataloging, her archivist's eye confirmed her suspicions. The majority of the items lacked provenance. Bills of sale were forged or non-existent, and many bore subtle signs of having been recently and improperly moved. She realized the true scope of his illegal trade. She wasn't just cataloging history. She was indexing a powerful criminal empire's illicit inventory. One afternoon, deep into cataloging a dusty box of personal effects, she found a small, unmarked packet of old photographs. These were not collection items. They were family snapshots. At the bottom of the stack, she found a picture of a younger Aeron Mack, maybe 20, standing beside a beautiful woman with dark, intense eyes, Luc's deceased mother. Merilyn scrutinized the image. The woman was elegant, poised, and distinctly French, but the physical resemblance to Merilyn herself was chillingly minimal. She didn't look like Merilyn. Yet, the woman's gaze in the photograph, that same dark, unyielding, almost dangerous intensity, was exactly the same look Aeron Mack directed at Merilyn now. Merilyn's blood ran cold. The connection wasn't merely the accent. It was something far more profound, disturbing, and possessive. She realized Aeron didn't just hear his mother's ghost in her voice, he saw her. And now Merilyn was locked in this house, tethered to the man's unresolved grief and obsession. Weeks passed inside the velvet cage of the Mack townhouse. Merilyn's days settled into a strange rhythm of professionalism and paranoia. The new normal consisted of hours spent in her pristine archive, indexing stolen artifacts, followed by dedicated, French-only time with Luc. The little boy flourished under her attention, his laughter becoming a rare sound in the fortress-like home. Aeron Mack was a constant, unsettling presence. He seldom intruded on their lessons, but Merilyn could feel his awareness like a pressure change. He would often appear silently in the doorway of the archives, or watch them from the balcony during Luc's playtime. His observation was relentless, but its flavor began to shift. The cold command in his eyes, the look of a predator assessing prey, occasionally cracked, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like longing or, worse, possessive yearning. His gaze was never fixed on Merilyn's face, but on the way she held Luc, or the way her lips formed the sacred, forbidden language. One frigid Tuesday evening, Merilyn stayed late, consumed by a particularly complex document, a detailed ledger of French colonial expenditures. The entries were cryptic, written in a specific shorthand only her archivist training could crack. The house had long gone quiet. The security detail, a silent, invisible hum. Aeron entered without knocking, carrying 2 glasses of amber liquid. He didn't speak, simply setting one down beside her on the desk and seating himself in the dark leather armchair, letting the shadows consume him. "The ledger is a masterwork of deception," she commented, needing to break the tension with work. "It details the sale of a colonial sugar plantation, but the language used for the transport vessels suggests they were carrying more than sugar, opium perhaps." Aeron nodded, sipping his drink. "My father taught me that history is just another commodity, and that the most valuable goods are the ones people don't know they've lost." The professional discussion quickly turned personal, steered by Aeron's sudden, raw need to speak. He set his glass down. He spoke of his mother, not in terms of the language, but in terms of her loss, the intense grief that was still a fresh wound, the mystery surrounding her death, and the crippling loneliness that had defined his life since. He admitted that forcing Luke to abandon French had been a selfish act, a way to silence a painful memory. When you spoke to him in the park, Aeron's voice was rough, uncharacteristically vulnerable. It wasn't just the accent, it was acceptance. You accepted the language, and you accepted him. I need that here. I need you here. It's selfish, Merilyn. It has nothing to do with contracts or curating. In that moment, Merilyn saw him not as the cold, calculating mafia boss, but as a deeply damaged and profoundly lonely man, haunted by a past he couldn't control. The knowledge was terrifying, but it was also a catalyst. She felt the line between them, blurring the power dynamic, momentarily shifting into a shared space of human frailty. The reluctant, powerful attraction she had suppressed since their first meeting surged forward, fueled by the unexpected glimpse of his wounded core. Aeron shifted, leaning forward from the shadows. His hand reached across the table, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The physical contact was immediate and electric, violating the professional barrier they had tenuously maintained. Their eyes met, and in the depths of his dark gaze, she saw raw desire mixed with an agonizing sadness. Just as the moment stretched to its breaking point, a sharp, buzzing vibration erupted from Aeron's wrist. It was the secure communication channel from his security detail. Aeron snatched his hand back, his face instantly turning to stone, his veneer of vulnerability shattered completely. He barked an order into the cuff microphone in a harsh, rapid language. Merilyn didn't understand a language of pure, lethal command. He looked back at her, his gaze now purely dangerous. Every trace of intimacy vanished. Go home. Now. Something has come up. And forget this conversation ever happened. Merilyn did not forget the conversation. She couldn't. The moment Aeron Mack had shattered his cold mask, revealing the haunted man beneath, he had changed everything. But the sudden, violent shift, back to the cold commander, barking orders in a foreign tongue and dismissing her, was the necessary catalyst. He had shattered the professional barrier. She would use the resulting chaos to breach his fortress. Aeron was gone for 3 days, presumably dealing with the something that had called him away. The house security remained suffocating, but without his intense, personal scrutiny, it became predictable. Merilyn used the reprieve to launch her quiet investigation. She paid excruciating attention to the routines of the security detail, the 15-minute intervals between patrols near the archives, the precise time the night housekeeper closed the windows. She even started scrutinizing Luke's French lessons, trying to find hidden ciphers or coded messages in the child's drawings, though that yielded only childish art. Her real opportunity lay in the archive itself. She started a meticulous inventory of the antique French clocks Aeron had acquired, objects too numerous and ornamental to be mere timepieces. One beautiful, oversized mantel clock, an 18th century pendule with intricate bronze detailing, felt subtly off balance. Using a fine archival probe, Merilyn delicately worked at the backplate. Her archivist hands, trained to handle centuries-old documents without leaving a trace, easily dislodged a cleverly concealed panel. Inside, nestled against the ticking mechanism, was a tiny, bound ledger, no bigger than a deck of cards, wrapped in oiled silk. It was handwritten, but the entries weren't standard numbers. Her museum training immediately recognized the script, a highly condensed, almost obsolete form of cipher, used by early 20th century art collectors to record provenance and transaction costs discreetly. It was a perfect form of encryption for a criminal whose assets were historical. Working late into the night, she translated the first few pages. The ledger detailed transactions for the stolen 1,695 manuscript and dozens of other objects from Aeron's collection. The numbers were staggering, detailing payments and transfers spanning multiple continents. Then she saw the name that sent a chill down her spine, connecting the Mack Empire directly to her former life. Victor Moreau. Moreau. a name synonymous with legitimate French art acquisition. He was a major, respected patron of the Met, a frequent face at galas, and an ostensible friend to Merilyn's former director. She realized the terrifying truth. Victor Moreau was not merely a buyer. He was a seller. Her boss's donor, the pillar of the French art community, was one of Aeron Mack's key suppliers, the ghost in the machine feeding the stolen art ring. The line between Mack's world and her world hadn't just blurred, it had collapsed. Merilyn carefully photographed the relevant entries, ensuring the images were encrypted before saving them. She wrapped the tiny book and resealed the compartment in the clock, leaving no trace of her intrusion. She had to act. She needed verification, an outside line. Using an ancient, secured institutional email chain she hadn't touched since graduation, Merilyn composed a brief, perfectly coded message to a trusted former professor in Paris, asking about the current status of the Moreau investigation. She pressed send, knowing she had just committed an act of treason against the man who employed her. But she had confirmation. She was trapped inside a dangerous network, and her only escape was to expose it. Aeron's return was not the silent, shadowy entrance Merilyn had become accustomed to. He walked into the archives, and the air immediately thickened, heavy with the cold scent of winter and ozone. He had been gone 3 days, but he returned as if he'd been fighting a war, his suit rumpled and his gaze dangerously sharp. He didn't look at the cataloging table or the manuscripts. He looked only at her. Merilyn had spent the 3 days translating the ledger and sending the coded message, actions that had placed an undeniable, invisible emotional boundary between them. He sensed it instantly. "You've changed since I left," Aeron stated, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "The respect for the contract is still there, but the willingness, the openness is gone." "What did you find, Merilyn?" She met his intense gaze, choosing her battlefield carefully, knowing she couldn't mention the ledger. She used the art, the tangible proof of his crimes, as her shield. "I'm cataloging a criminal enterprise, Mr. Mack," Merilyn challenged, closing the ledger she was working on, her hands steady. "I know what these artifacts are, and I know where they were stolen from. My professional ethics are on fire. I'm asking you to justify the damage you are doing to history, to trust, and to me." Aeron's face remained stone still, but the darkness in his eyes deepened. He walked closer, crowding the space between them, until Merilyn could feel the heat radiating off him. "Ethics," he scoffed, the word tasting like ash. "You want to know the real reason I steal? You want to know the price of my acquisitions? Fine." He leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to a gravelly, guttural confession that cracked the silence of the room. He spoke about Luke's mother, not with grief, but with rage and guilt. She was not a victim of circumstance, Merilyn. She was a target. A rival family wanted to hurt me, and they used the softest point they could find. She died trying to protect Luke from a hit. She shielded him with her body. His eyes were blazing now, wet with unshed anguish. The last thing I ever heard her say was a phrase in French, telling Luke to run. Every time Luke speaks that language, I don't hear a lullaby, Merilyn. I hear the sound of my failure. I hear the moment I couldn't protect her. He hadn't allowed Luke to speak French because it reminded him of his failure to protect her. Aeron paused, dragging a heavy breath into his lungs. I built this life to protect him. I buy these artifacts because if I own all the history, all the value, I become untouchable. You think you're cataloging art, Merilyn? You're cataloging my life. He moved closer, his possessiveness now a physical weight. And you, Merilyn Dubois, are the only thing, the only person who has brought true, honest peace back to him, and by extension, to me. You are my most valuable acquisition, and now that I have you, I won't let you go. Merilyn was shaking, the confession a tidal wave of pain and terrifying control. The cold-blooded criminal was also a devastated father trapped in an agonizing loop of guilt. She saw the twisted rationale of his empire, built entirely upon the bedrock of his grief. She almost told him about the ledger. She opened her mouth, the word Moreau forming on her tongue, a desperate, foolish bid for honesty, or perhaps a cry for help. Before she could speak, Aeron moved. His hands cupped her face, pulling her up and into his space. His mouth came down on hers, a kiss full of raw relief, desperate grief, and possessive desire. It was the crushing release of all the control he had fought to maintain, and in that moment, all the boundaries Merilyn had desperately clung to shattered. The morning after the kiss was a minefield of unspoken tension. The professional veneer was now thoroughly shattered, replaced by a charged silence that felt more dangerous than any threat. Aeron was cold and distant, yet his eyes tracked Merilyn's every movement with a possessiveness that had intensified overnight. Merilyn, meanwhile, felt profoundly unsettled. The kiss had been a powerful, reckless act, and it had done nothing to absolve the man of his crimes. The final piece of Merilyn's carefully constructed resistance arrived in a brief, encrypted reply on her private institutional channel. The response was subtle, almost cryptic, but devastatingly clear. Moreau is active. Formal investigation has begun. You are in danger. Do not trust the environment. Merilyn's course of action was instantly clear. The romantic tension meant nothing against the reality of an international investigation that could swiftly sweep her up as an accomplice. She had to leave, and she had to take the evidence. During Luke's morning playtime, Merilyn quietly slipped into her archives office. She zipped her laptop, packed a few essential clothes into a small satchel, and most critically, secured the tiny, incriminating ledger. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was planning an escape from a high-security prison, but the velvet cage was expertly designed. As she reached the main gallery, intending to slip out the side entrance during the hourly shift change, Aeron was waiting for her, standing silhouetted against the grand arched window. He didn't need to check her bag. His eyes immediately locked on the bulge of the ledger. "You're leaving," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "And you're taking something that doesn't belong to you." Merilyn dropped her bag to the floor, confronting him. "I'm taking proof, Mr. Mack. Proof that connects your empire to men like Victor Moreau. I can't stay here and participate in this." Aeron didn't raise his voice or move to stop her physically. He didn't utter a single threat against her life. Instead, he made the emotional choice clear. "I will never harm you, Merilyn. That is a guarantee. But if you walk out that door, you break Luke's heart forever. You take away the only thing that has ever given him peace. And you become a threat. I will be forced to hunt the evidence you carry, not you. I will retrieve that ledger, and I will destroy its source." The air crackled with the impossible magnitude of the decision. Just then, Luke bounded down the grand staircase, drawn by the sound of their raised voices. He rushed to Merilyn, his face clouded with worry. "Merilyn, s'il te plaît, lisez-moi l'histoire," he pleaded in French, clutching her hand. "Read me a story." Merilyn looked at the boy's pleading face, then up at Aeron, a man caught between the suffocating necessity of his criminal empire and the simple, desperate love for his son. She weighed her moral duty to expose his crimes against the immediate safety and profound emotional needs of Luke, and the realization that leaving would turn his only shield into his enemy's target. Merilyn looked from the packed bag to Luke's innocent, pleading face, then back to the powerful, dangerous, but desperately vulnerable man standing before her. She made her decision, slowly reaching down. She took the ledger from the bag and set it down on the low marble table, but kept her hand resting on the hidden key to her digital escape. She opened her mouth and began to speak, but the words were not a farewell or a surrender. They were a condition. "I will stay, but only if..." What choice did Merilyn make? Did she walk away with the ledger, or stay to fight the darkness from within? Find out the shocking condition that changes everything in the video. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next. Don't forget to subscribe.